Today we're going to talk about adding and subtracting integers, and the truth is that there are actually a lot of different ways to show how to add and subtract integers. I'm just showing you 2 ways, but there are many more. So if these don't make sense to you, let me know and I can teach you another way in class. Alright, so the first thing we're going to start with is adding integers. Our method 1 is to use a number line. So when you think about the number line, we've got the negatives to the left and the positives to the right. The easy thing to remember is if you're adding a negative integer, you go to the left. That's where the negative integers are. If you're adding a positive integer, you move to the right. Easy to remember because the positive integers go to the right on the number line. So let's do some examples. The first one is negative 6 plus 9. I'm going to start at negative 6. Since I'm adding a positive number, I move to the right. So I start at negative 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. My final answer is going to be 3. Let's try this one. We've got negative 1 plus a negative 4. So I start at negative 1. I'm adding a negative number, so I'm going to go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4. I end up at negative 5. And my last example is 4 plus negative 6. So I start at 4. I'm adding a negative number, so I go to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I end up at negative 2. If you like this method and you want to draw a number line all over your classwork, all over your homework, I'm totally fine with that. If that's what you need, go ahead and use it. The second method we're going to talk about is absolute value, or uses absolute value. So this is one of those things where there's rules and you just have to memorize the rules. So if we're adding numbers that have the same sign, 2 numbers with the same sign, we add the absolute values together and we use the common sign. For example, negative 6 plus negative 9. Let's add the absolute values together. So the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. The absolute value of negative 9 is 9. 6 plus 9 is 15. Since they're both negative, our answer is going to be negative 15. Our next example, 3 plus 14. Let's add the absolute values. The absolute value here is 3. The absolute value here is 14. 3 plus 14 is 17, and since they're both positive, it's going to be a positive 17. When the answer is positive, you don't have to make a plus sign, but if it helps you keep your work organized, it's okay if you do for now. If the signs are different, if you're adding a positive number and a negative number, what you do is subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. Then you use the same sign as the number with the larger absolute value. That looks like a lot of words, it looks overwhelming. It's not that tricky. Let's do some examples. For the first one, we've got negative 4 plus 6. I'm going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. So our absolute values are 4 and 6. Well, 6 minus 4 is 2, so I know I'm going to have a 2 in here. The greater absolute value is 6, and 6 is positive. So my answer is going to be positive. There were more positives to start with, so my answer is going to stay positive. Here, I'm going to subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger. So I've got 8 and 2. 8 minus 2 is 6. Now let's see what this sign is going to be. Well, the larger absolute value is 8, which is negative. So there were more negatives to start with. Our answer is still going to be negative. 5 plus negative 7. Our absolute values are 5 and 7. 7 minus 5 is 2. We look at the larger absolute value, which is 7. 7 is negative, so our answer is going to be a negative 2. I'll move out of the way a second. The last thing to think about is if 2 numbers are opposites, the sum of a number and its opposite is always going to be 0. Negative 7 plus 7 is 0. Negative 8 plus 8 is 0. Negative 400 plus 400 is 0. This vocabulary word, additive inverse, it's not something that you have to know right now, but it's a fancier word for saying opposite. So 7 has an additive inverse of negative 7, and the sum of those 2 numbers is 0. Excuse me. All right, now we're going to move on to subtracting. The reason I'm smishing all this information into one lecture video is because subtracting is really like addition. If you can do addition, then you can do the subtraction. The key to subtracting integers is to add the opposite. So instead of subtracting, we're going to change them all to addition problems, which we just learned about. So, for example, number 1, 7 minus 11. It's a subtraction problem, but for every subtraction problem, we change them to addition problems and we add the opposite. So I'm going to ignore, or I'm going to take away this negative sign, the subtraction sign. I'm going to change it to addition, and I'm going to add the opposite of 11, which is negative 11. So these two problems are the same thing, but I know how to solve this one. So I'll give you a second. I drew a number line, so you can solve it on the number line, or you can do the absolute value method. If you'd like to pause the video and take a second and go ahead and solve, go ahead and pause it. If you've got it already, the answer is negative 4. The second example, negative 6 minus 3. We're going to change it to an addition problem. So instead of subtracting, we're going to add the opposite. Negative 6 plus the opposite of 3 is negative 3. So negative 6 plus negative 3. If you'd like to pause it to find the answer, go ahead. The answer for that one is negative 9. And our last example, 4 minus a negative 2. I like to put these parentheses around negative numbers to kind of separate it as a negative number. It makes it easier for me to read my work and to be able to tell what the problem says. You don't have to do it, but it will help you organize your work. All right, I'm going to change this to an addition problem. I'm going to add the opposite. So 4 plus the opposite of negative 2 is a positive 2. So 4 plus 2, I don't even need a number line or any rules to solve that. We just know that one. Some students get confused. Subtracting a negative is a positive. Yes, and the way I like to remember it is, pretend like these are my two negative signs, subtracting and negative. I've got these two lines, I put them together, voila! So let's try some examples with variables in them. So, we've got some examples. We have to evaluate the expression when d equals a negative 3. So the first thing I need to do is substitute in for my variables. So d minus a negative 25. I'm going to substitute first. Okay, now that I've substituted, I see I have a subtraction problem. And every subtraction problem is really an addition problem. We add the opposite. So I've got negative 3 plus 25, because the opposite of negative 25 is 25. When I solve that, I'm going to get 22. For my next problem, 7 minus d, I'm going to substitute first. 7 minus negative 3. Subtraction, I need to make it an addition problem. So 7 plus the opposite of negative 3 is 3, and that's easy enough to solve. That'll just give me 10. And let me move over here. The last problem, I've got three numbers. D plus 14 minus a negative 8. I actually just lied to you. I have two numbers in a variable, but you know what I mean. Let's substitute first. Negative 3 plus 14 minus a negative 8. Now, when I have three numbers, I'm not going to overwhelm myself and do all three at first. I'm just going to do two at a time. So I'm going to start right here. Negative 3 plus 14 is going to give me 11. So now I have 11 minus a negative 8. And when I have that subtraction problem, remember, subtraction is adding the opposite. So I'm going to change it to adding the opposite. And that's just going to give me 19. Thank you guys for listening. And remember, there are three types of people in the world. Those who can count and those who can't.